Hello, grade 12s. Welcome back from the short break. Just before the break, we were looking at the protection of natural resources, and we said that in a free trade system, natural resources could be easily exploited, and therefore it is important that government protects the local industries and the indigenous knowledge, and also safeguard the indigenous knowledge so that we can pass it on to future generations. So let's move on and look at free trade. So we've looked at protectionism, but how does it come? How does it fit in? How does free trade fit in when we look at protectionism? So a definition of free trade is when producers and consumers are free to buy goods and services from anywhere in the world without the interference of government. Okay, so it seems like an ideal situation that you can just purchase goods and services from anywhere in the world without government interference. So this space is not protected. So we don't have protectionism happening over here. So how does it tie up with the whole idea? So why do people prefer the system over protectionism? So arguments in favor of free trade are: the first item that we're going to look at is the fact that there is specialization that happens in the free trade market. So this is our first point. So I'm just going to put a 1 next to it so that we can refer back to it if we need to do so. So what is specialization? So let's first define what it is. Okay, so I'm going to pull my screen down. Okay, now it's behaving. Okay, so the theory of comparative advantage shows that world output can be increased if countries specialize in what they are relatively best at producing. Okay, so in each nation, so if each nation does what it does best, and then everyone will enjoy lower prices and high levels of output. Okay, so it's all about encouraging countries or a country to focus on what they do best. So to produce goods and services that they know that they have excellent infrastructure to produce them, and that they have all the resources, quality resources, in order to produce these goods and services, and that would be their focus. So they're not going to make products that they know that they are not so good at making and that they don't have the required infrastructure in order to make those products. So they need to focus on what they do best. And if we do this, it is believed that then everyone is going to enjoy lower prices and the higher levels of output. Okay, so it sounds like a good system. And I know that there are countries that have followed the specialization approach, where they focus on manufacturing certain products and services, and even if they end up with a surplus of those products and services, then they can export them to other countries, and in so doing they will generate an income and there will be more economic activity happening in their country. And also with specialization, there is more activity around the domestic production of goods and services. So it is a good system that countries could follow. So this is an argument in favor of free trade. Another argument in favor of free trade is the economies of scale. So free trade allows economies of scale to be maximized, and thus unit costs are reduced. Economies of scale are a source of comparative advantage. So in the fact that, in a system where there is less government interference, so supply and demand plays a very important role, because government tries to minimize the restrictive measures around these markets, and also the regulatory policies in these markets. So it's now purely based on the economies of scale, and because then you are maximizing the input or the unit costs are also reduced. And this all centers around the comparative advantage. So it comes down to this, which is very important in the world of economics. So there's more freedom for the economies of scale to take place because there is less interference from the government and there are less restrictive measures that are put into place and regulatory measures as well. And then choice. So free trade allows consumers the choice of what to buy from the whole world. So it's not just limited to the local markets, but they have a choice to purchase any item that they may desire from any place in the world, and not just to what is produced domestically. Consumers' welfare thus increased because some consumers at least will prefer to buy foreign goods rather than to buy domestic goods. There are people that have this perception that if it's made in France, then it's of a good quality. If it's made in Brazil, then if it's coffee from Brazil, then it's going to have this beautiful taste and smell. It's different preferences and tastes that people have. So remember now, the preferences have become so advanced that local suppliers are just struggling to meet the demands that local consumers have. So they do, sometimes give them the space or the opportunity to purchase certain goods and services from other countries that are not, obviously those goods that are not produced domestically. So that plays an important role. So there are people that would prefer to buy products from other countries and not buy products from the local market as well. And then the innovations that have been happening. So free trade increases competition, and this encourages the innovation in goods and also in the processes of making the goods. That innovation is something that's important when we look at the world of entrepreneurship. We know that with more competition in the market, then businesses are forced to be innovative in the way that they design products and in a way that they offer their services. So this is caused by the fact that there is competition in the market. So thus it puts pressure on the local suppliers to be at the same standard with overseas or suppliers from abroad. So it is a good thing for us consumers because quality is not compromised, but quality and service are improved because local suppliers want to compete with international suppliers, and therefore they want to ensure that the quality of goods and services that they offer are in line with the international trends in order to discourage that local consumer who is wanting to purchase goods and services from a supplier from another country. Also, it improves the global efficiency. Under free trade, resources are allocated more efficiently as markets expand because each country specializes in its most effective production. So I really like this point because I'm all for efficiency. So if we follow the free trade system, we know that then the resources will be allocated efficiently because the markets now have expanded and because the country will now specialize on what they know that they are most effective in making. So you're not going to now produce items that you know that you don't have the resources in order to make the best possible offering in that regard. But you would leave that to other countries who have the right skills and expertise in order to make sure that they can produce those goods and services. So specialization does play an important role when it comes to quality and offering a quality service, but also just being effective in your production processes as well. So free trade leads to greater world production of traded goods, leading to an increase in economic welfare. Okay, so because the system is not regulated and it's not protected, so therefore it does encourage businesses to trade with other countries. So if you're good at making this, then do it in surplus so that you can export that to another country. And because there are less barriers that are put in place by government, so government does actually encourage more economic activity with other countries as well. So free trade, plays an important role in this regard. The fact that, people are free to trade with one another and there are less restrictive measures that are put in place by government. Right, then moving on to our next point. So free trade leads to mutual gains from international trade to all countries. So there will be mutual gains that will exist because remember, we are no longer self-sufficient as a country and therefore we depend on other countries to supply us with certain goods and services. So there is a mutual gain that would happen between countries that trade with one another. So I've got this in abundance, so I decide to export it to another country. In doing so, I generate income, so there's an injection into our economy, but also that country receives the goods and services that are needed by its citizens, and therefore it is in a position to satisfy the needs and wants of its citizens. So there is a mutual gain, and I think that that interrelationship between the different countries is important, and it's something that we shouldn't ignore or take for granted. So these are some of the arguments for free trade. So earlier on I spoke about this desirable mix of protection and free trade, that other countries choose to use a mix of protection and free trade when looking at economic policy, because the conditions in different countries vary. So, South Africa is very different to China. And also China is very different to Angola. So the needs and the conditions in different countries do vary. And therefore, countries have to choose policies that will be most suited to their offerings and to the conditions of their own country. So it's important to look at a mix and take, a bit of this from there and a bit of this from there, and then put it all together and have a customized policy in place that will support and also protect the local suppliers. So let's have a look at a few points under this desirable mix of protection and free trade. So the first point that we're going to look at is the import of substitution and the export promotion. So import substitution and export promotion. So let's discuss that further. There we are. So the strategies to import substitution and export promotion should not be regarded as unavoidable opposites. Many countries started out by protecting their domestic industries and then applied export-orientated policies only after a considerable length of time. So import substitution almost inevitably leads to export promotion. So there are countries that started off by protecting their domestic industries, but then eventually ended up applying policies that are more export orientated. So, but I think they did it for a duration of time where they protected their products for a considerable length of time, and then thereafter they were open to import substitutions, which then led to the export promotion. So here you've got a combination of two policies that are being put together, but it is done in a strategic way because they did protect the local market for a considerable length of time before opening it up to export promotion. And then let's have a look at protection and free trade. We know that there are different regions, and regions trade, protect. We've got the SADC region, and also there are agreements between the countries in the SADC region in terms of you don't need a visa to go to Swaziland, to Zimbabwe and Lesotho, Botswana, so your passport will get you into those countries. So those are the agreements that, or an example of an agreement that has been put into place by this particular region. So regions also in the form of trade blocs makes use of free trade and protection. So member countries pursue free trade with one another but apply trade restrictions outside their bloc. Okay, so we know that if there's for example, the NAFTA area and the custom unions, so that is a bloc. So those are member countries. So SADC, has its member countries, South Africa, Botswana, Lesotho, Zimbabwe, and so on. So they might have, a free trade happening between them as members of the SADC region, but countries outside the region will then have to follow the restrictions and the protective measures that have been put into place. So only countries that are within the membership or the bloc will enjoy the benefits of free trade, but countries outside the bloc will have to then follow the restrictions and the regulatory policies that are put into place. So those are the challenges and the benefits of belonging to a particular area so that you are considered part of the bloc and that you're not finding yourself outside the bloc, because if you are outside the bloc, then you will be then subjected to the restrictions and the regulatory policies around that particular region. And then we know that globalization has also played a very important role over the past few years, because countries now trade with one another, and we know that countries are no longer self-sufficient, so they do rely on other countries for certain goods and services. So it's important that we study the global market and see what the policies and what the practice is when it comes to the global market. So it's important that we look at the restrictive practice that may occur in the global space so that we can have a strategy to approach that. So when we're looking at restrictive practices, this is whether they relate to import or to exports, but they do have the same effect. They reduce the potential volume of the world production that would be possible if there was a complete free trade, and only those goods of which countries had comparative advantage were produced. So to pursue this objective of free trade, an independent facilitator was required, because you need an organization that is going to facilitate the economic activity or the production and the protection of goods and services, and also to help implement free trade. So the WTO is such a facilitator that will ensure that this objective of free trade is achieved. Time to take a short break, and I will see you right after this.